December had always carried a gentle kind of cold in Austin, the kind that nips at your fingertips but never overstays its welcome. But that year, the chill felt different, sharper, hungrier. It lingered in the small cracks of the house I had built with my wife, Clara, almost 50 years ago. A house made from limestone, sweat, and decades of memories that still lived in its walls. But to my daughter-in-law, Jess, the house was nothing more than a dated prize waiting to be remodeled. I sat in my old armchair that evening, a book open on my lap though I hadn't read a single word in nearly half an hour. Jess paced across the living room, her voice smooth and businesslike, the kind of tone people use when they're planning something they don't intend to pay for. Her phone was pressed to her ear. No, the bones are good," she said briskly. "But everything needs to be modernized. The living room completely opened up. And that wallpaper in the dining room is tragic. We'll need to strip all of it." Tragic. Clara had handpicked that wallpaper. I could still see her standing in the aisle of a home goods store, pressing the sample against her cheek and smiling like she'd found treasure. To Jess, it was an eyesore. She walked across the hardwood floors that still bore faint scuff marks from my son's first tricycle. Marks I never repaired because they reminded me of laughter. To her, they were imperfections. I kept my face unreadable. At 72, I had learned the power of quiet observation. People reveal everything if you stop rushing to respond. And in my former profession, 30-plus years as a forensic accountant, details were everything. Mark came home then, looking exhausted. His tie was loose, his shoulders slumped, and yet the air grew tight as soon as he stepped into the room. Jess greeted him with a kiss before whispering something too low for me to hear. But I saw his eyes flick to me for the briefest second. Guilt has a particular look. Quick, nervous. The same look he had when he was a kid and told me he had no idea who broke the neighbor's window. "Good day, Dad?" he asked, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It was quiet," I answered. He nodded vaguely, already drifting toward the stairs. "We're going up for a bit before dinner." They left me alone in the room, alone with the realization that something wasn't just off, something was underway, and I wasn't meant to know about it. That night, the three of us sat around a table eating leftovers Jess reheated with visible annoyance, as if warming up food was a personal inconvenience. I cleaned my plate in silence and returned to my study, ready to unwind. But the notification on my laptop stopped me cold. Email from my bank. Action required. Verify your recent loan application. Loan application? I hadn't applied for anything. My house had been paid off for decades. My finances were simple, organized, and untouched. I opened the email, a standard message from the fraud prevention department asking me to confirm a home equity line of credit application. A helic. My pulse didn't quicken. I didn't panic. I went still, the kind of stillness that settles in when an old skill wakes up again after years of hibernation. Forensic accounting wasn't just about numbers. It was about patterns, motives, deception. Someone had tried to open a credit line under my name, and I had a very good guess who. I stood, ready to confront them immediately, but paused when I heard their voices in the living room. They were curled together on the sofa, a tablet glowing between them like a campfire shared by thieves. Jess traced her finger along a sleek blueprint. "Picture it, Mark. We knocked down this wall and put a chef's kitchen here. Top-tier appliances. Quartz countertops." He murmured agreement. And then I saw it, the excitement in their eyes. The hunger. The kind of hunger people get when they're spending money that doesn't belong to them. I closed the laptop softly. Confronting them now would only give them time to hide what they had done. No, you never warn a suspect you're onto them. You examine the books first. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in a coat of forced cheer. Jess replaced every meaningful ornament Clara and I had collected over the years with sleek metallic ones that had no history, only price tags. Dinner tasted as dry as the conversation. They gave me a charcoal sweater. Expensive but impersonal. A gift you give to a stranger you want to impress. I thanked them anyway. That night, I lay awake until well past 2. When I finally went downstairs for water, I heard soft whispers and froze in the hallway. They were sitting in the living room again, illuminated only by the twinkling Christmas lights. Jess whispered sharply, "After the holiday, he signs the POA papers. We get access to everything legitimately. Then we move him to Brookdale. They have an opening next month. He'll barely know what's happening." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Jess, it's my dad. It's our future," she snapped. "He's confused half the time anyway. Just get him to sign. Once we control the house, we can finally move forward. Lake Travis isn't going to wait forever." Then she said the sentence that sealed their fate. "We kick him out after Christmas. Kick me out. From the home I built. From the memories I kept alive. They didn't know I was watching. They didn't know the man standing in the shadows wasn't scared. He was calculating." I turned back to my room silently and closed the door with surgical precision. They had made their move. Now it was my turn. The morning after Christmas arrived wrapped in a gray drizzle, the kind that makes everything feel heavier than it already is. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, listening to the soft murmur of voices drifting from upstairs. Mark and Jess were getting ready to head out. "Shopping," they said. "Sales," they said. Their voices carried the same tension they'd had for weeks now, like two people waiting for a bomb to go off but pretending everything was fine. Mark came downstairs first, looking worn, his hair messy from sleep. "We're heading out, Dad," he said, grabbing his keys. "Might be out most of the day." "Drive safe," I replied, folding a newspaper I hadn't read. Jess rushed down after him, irritation practically radiating off her. She didn't even glance at me as she said, "Let's go, Mark. We're wasting daylight." They left in a hurry, their tires crunching over the wet gravel. And then, silence. The silence I'd been waiting for. The kind of silence where a man can think clearly and act decisively. I rose from the table, walked to my study, and pulled out a small leather-bound address book. The edges were worn soft. The pages held the names of people who mattered across the span of a lifetime. I flipped through until I found it. David Chin, a friend, a neighbor's son, and now an attorney. I dialed the number. He picked up after 3 rings, his voice warm. "David Chun speaking." "David," I said. "It's Leo." His tone shifted instantly. "Leo, it's been a while. How are you?" I hesitated. Christmas was enlightening. He paused, sensing something deeper beneath the surface. "Talk to me," he said gently. So I did. I told him everything I overheard. Every word of Jess's cold planning. Every hesitation in Mark's voice. And then the email from my bank. When I finished, the line went dead quiet. Finally David breathed out, slow and controlled. "Leo, that's not just immoral. It's criminal. I know. This is fraud. Elder financial manipulation. Forgery if they signed anything in your name. You need protection immediately." His anger simmered just below the surface, but I cut through it before it overtook him. "David," I said, "I need you steady. No anger. No emotion. Just the lawyer." Another pause, then his voice returned like steel. "You'll have it. Tell me what you need." "I need access to everything that's been done under my name. Every account. Every credit line. Every application. I'll draft a limited power of attorney so I can act on your behalf," he said. "You'll have it in your inbox within the hour." "And David." "Yes. I need to secure my home." "That's already step 2, he answered. "We put legal insulation around the house immediately. And depending on what we find, we may need to do more." I leaned back in my chair and looked at the window streaked with rain. "David," I said quietly, "I think they've already taken something." He didn't hesitate. "Then I'll help you take everything back." When the documents arrived, I signed them digitally. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. The old instincts were sharper than they had been in years. I logged into my financial accounts with a sense of grim purpose. I didn't start with the obvious. In an audit, you always begin where people get sloppy, the edges, not the center. I pulled my credit report. My stomach tightened, not in fear, but in confirmation. There it was. A hard inquiry from a lender I didn't recognize. A home equity line of credit. $150,000. Filed 6 months earlier. A forged application pretending to be me. Jess had arrived in a new BMW 6 months ago. I remembered how proud Mark had acted, telling me she'd finally hit a big commission at work. I clicked through to the lender's site and called the support line, disguising my tone with gentle confusion. The kind of voice elderly clients often use when they just want help. "Sweetheart, I seem to have misplaced the original paperwork for my loan," I said kindly. "Would you mind emailing me a copy? I'm trying to get everything in order." Within minutes, the PDF arrived. I opened it. My signature stared back at me, except it wasn't mine. Closed but lifeless. A counterfeit that someone thought would fool a bank. But I've signed my name tens of thousands of times. I would know my own signature even if I were half asleep. This one was too perfect. And too cold. Forgery clear as day. Now that I had proof of the loan, I dug into the transactions. The spending told a story, their story, and it wasn't pretty. $45,000, BMW dealership. $12,000, luxury resort in Aspen. Thousands more, designer stores, jewelry, boutique restaurants. Chauffeur services. Every expense was an indictment. Every dollar a shovel they used to dig their own grave. They hadn't just planned to steal from me. They already had. I saved every bank statement, every receipt, every document. I organized everything into a digital case file so airtight not even a seasoned criminal could slip through it. When I had it all, I called David again. "What did you find?" he asked. "Everything," I said, including a forged signature and a full financial trail. He was silent for a long moment. Then, "Leo, this isn't just going to be enough. This is going to bury them." But I wasn't ready to bury them yet. I wanted them to see the hole they dug before the dirt came down. "David," I said, "we're not going straight to the authorities." He hesitated. "Leo, we will, but not yet." "Then what are you planning?" "A presentation," I said slowly. "In this house. On my time. In my way." "A presentation?" he repeated. "An audit," I corrected. They wanted to play with my life. "I'll show them the numbers." A soft exhale. Then he understood. "You're going to confront them with everything." "Yes." "Then tell me what you need." I stared at the photo of Clara on my desk, her smile soft and steady. "I need the house sold," I said. "Fast. Quietly. In cash." David's voice grew cold and sharp. "I'll make it happen." The Thursday that followed was quiet, unnaturally quiet. Mark and Jess had fallen into a pattern of circling me like predators waiting for weakness. They still spoke sweetly, but the sweetness clung to their words like syrup hiding poison. They thought they were subtle. They thought I didn't notice the way their eyes lingered on documents lying around, or how they watched me check the mail as if expecting me to drop dead mid-step. But I noticed everything. And on that Thursday at 10 a.m. sharp, the first major step of my plan arrived. A modest gray sedan turned into the driveway. Not flashy. Not suspicious. The kind of car you forget the moment it's out of sight. From it stepped David Chun, dressed cleanly in a charcoal coat, and another man who carried the aura of someone who dealt in cash, contracts, and quick decisions. Mr. Harrison. David introduced him simply. "This is Mr. Harrison. He's the buyer." Mr. Harrison wasn't there to admire the house. He wasn't one of those people who marvel at crown molding or compliment granite countertops. No, he walked through each room with the eyes of a man assessing an object, not a home. He ran his hand along the structural beams, checked the plumbing lines in the basement, studied the foundation. He didn't ask about the memories held in this place. He didn't care what holidays had been spent here, or how many birthday candles had been blown out beneath this roof. And strangely, that made it easier. When he finished the tour, we stood in the living room, the same living room where Jess had once insulted Clara's wallpaper. Mr. Harrison turned to David, gave a small nod, and named his offer. It wasn't the highest I could have demanded, but it was fast, clean, and in cash, the three qualities I needed most. David didn't hesitate. "My client accepts." Just like that, A nearly half-century of history became a number to be transferred to a private account Jess and Mark didn't even know existed. After they left, the house felt different. Lighter. As though it understood it had a new destiny and was no longer tethered to a future built on lies. I walked through the halls alone and listened to the echoes. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt purpose. I retrieved a set of sturdy empty boxes from the attic. Not to pack up my life, but to extract the parts of it that mattered. The house itself was no longer mine in spirit, only in contract. But certain things could never belong to another. I began with the mantle. I lifted the framed photograph of Clara, the one taken the day we moved in. Her smile radiated warmth even after all these years. I wrapped it in a blanket and placed it in a box. I moved to the kitchen and took her recipe box. The one filled with handwritten cards stained with love, laughter, and sometimes vanilla extract. Then to the bedroom, where I packed my father's old watch, worn down from decades of use. It ticked faintly when I wound it, as if reminding me that time was something we carried, not something our children owned. I spent the whole afternoon gathering the pieces of Clara and my life together. Not everything, only what mattered. Furniture could be replaced. Walls could be repainted. But these were legacy. While packing, I spoke to Clara in my mind, as I often did. I know you wouldn't want to leave this house, I thought quietly. But love, they poisoned it. And I won't let your memory live in a place that was nearly stolen. When the final box was closed, I exhaled. It wasn't grief. It was release. That evening, once the house had sunk back into its nighttime stillness, I opened my laptop for a video call with David. The glow from my screen illuminated the study, a room that had seen more calculations in the last week than it had in the years since my retirement. David appeared on the screen, sharp and focused. All right, Leo, let's go over everything one final time. He shared his screen, showing the organized folders of evidence. First, the Helic application with the forged signature. I had highlighted the subtle differences that no one but me could identify. Second, the audio file from the night they tried to push the POA onto me. Their own voices, clear as day, admitting to everything. Third, the financial trail. The spreadsheet I built outlining every single dollar stolen from me. Every transaction cross-referenced with dates, amounts, and even social media posts Jess had made while on her work trips. A foolproof ledger of greed. David leaned back in his chair and exhaled deeply. Leo, this is airtight. Once I submit this, the DA's office will act quickly. There's no ambiguity here. They didn't just cross a line. They sprinted past it. I nodded. Good. But you understand, he added carefully. Once we turn this in, it becomes a criminal case. They'll be interviewed, investigated, charged. I understand. And you're still certain you want to confront them before this goes to the DA? I looked at the evidence. At Clara's picture on my desk. At the home that they tried to hollow out while I still lived inside it. Yes, I said softly but firmly. They hid in the dark to plan this. They'll face the truth in the light. In my home. Not in a courtroom. Not yet. David nodded slowly. Then we do it your way. Before ending the call, a message popped up on my screen. An email from his paralegal. Executed. David read it too. That's the signed contract, Leo. The house officially has a buyer. Closing in 2 weeks. And the sold sign is ready whenever you say. A sold sign. Already printed. I leaned back, feeling the full weight and triumph of everything that had been set in motion. All that remained was patience. And timing. Because soon, very soon, the entire performance would unfold exactly as planned. The days following the house sale moved with a deceptive calm. On the surface, everything looked almost normal, overly normal, in fact. Mark and Jess acted as though Christmas had wiped the slate clean, as if the tension hanging between us had evaporated overnight. But the truth was simpler. They were waiting for me to break. And the longer I stayed quiet, the more desperate they became. They'd expected a vulnerable old man. Someone who would lean on them for help, cling to them for protection, fold under their fabricated concern. Instead, they met silence. But silence wasn't surrender. Silence was strategy. and my silence was slowly choking their patience. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. Dinner was unusually quiet, even for us. I ate slowly, watching them from behind the rim of my glass. Jess kept glancing at me, tapping her manicured nail against the table like a metronome, setting the pace of her anxiety. Mark pushed his food around without taking a single bite. They were drowning, and they thought they could pull me down with them. After we finished, they excused themselves and disappeared into the hallway. Their whispers leaked through the walls, not loud enough for a normal person to catch. But I wasn't a normal person. "He's going to drag this forever," Jess hissed. "You need to stop babying him. He should have signed weeks ago." "I'm trying," Mark muttered. "He gets confused. I just feel bad." "Feel bad," Jess snapped. "Mark, we can't move forward until he agrees. We're stuck here. You want to be stuck here for years. A beat. He'll sign. Tonight." It wasn't a request. It was an order. A few minutes later, they came walking toward the living room together, like prosecutors entering a courtroom where they believed the verdict was guaranteed. Jess held a thick manila folder, the same one I had seen tucked into their bedroom closet weeks earlier. That folder had weight, not the physical kind, but the kind built from intentions sharp enough to cut. She placed it on the table beside me with a firm, unmistakable thud. Mark dragged a dining chair closer, sitting directly across from me. His posture was rehearsed. Sympathetic, leaning forward, hands clasped. Jess hovered near him like a shadow, wearing a soft smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Dad," Mark began, voice gentle, stressing the fragility he assumed I lived in. "We need to talk." I closed my book with a sigh, placing a finger inside to keep the page. "All right," I said mildly. "What's on your mind?" Jess jumped in before he could speak. "We've been worried about you, Leo. Truly." She gestured to the folder. "This is a packet our attorney prepared. Just basic paperwork that will help us help you." Mark nodded quickly, too quickly. "It's just so things don't get overwhelming for you, Dad." "Bills," Jess added smoothly. "The house. Medical stuff. You know. Life." I looked at the folder resting beside me. "Quite a stack for something simple, don't you think?" "It's mostly standard legal language," Jess replied, waving it off with a polished laugh. "We already reviewed it. It's all routine." "Routine." "Yes, routine for thieves." When they sat down, I had already prepared my countermeasure. Earlier, as they walked down the hallway, I tapped my phone and quietly placed it face down on the table, recording every word. I reached for the folder, letting my hand shake slightly. A convincing performance, one they wanted desperately to believe. My, I muttered. "This looks complicated." "Just a normal power of attorney, Dad," Mark said. "Durable power of attorney. It allows us to handle things for you. If something happens to you, the authority stays in place." "Like a good pair of boots," I said, feigning curiosity. "Durable." He smiled weakly. "Exactly. And this part?" I asked, pointing at a section highlighted in yellow. Jess leaned forward, her tone dripping reassurance. "That just outlines asset management. Properties. Investments. The house." "Ah," I said softly. "The house. Only if needed," she added quickly. "We're thinking long-term care. Just making sure everything is handled responsibly. For your safety." I nodded slowly, pretending the idea required deep thought. "So if I sign these papers, you too would have the authority to handle everything? My finances, my accounts, even the house itself?" Jess lit up like she had been waiting for that exact question. "Precisely," she said. "We'd only act in your best interest." Mark repeated mechanically, "It's to protect you, Dad." I gazed at the signature line. A pen sat beside it, deliberately placed. They leaned forward in unison, breath held, bodies tense. I picked up the pen and held it over the line. Jess's eyes sparkled with triumph. Mark exhaled in relief. I let the silence stretch, stretching it until it began to tremble. Then I set the pen down slowly on the table beside the folder. "I need time," I said calmly. My old eyes aren't what they used to be. I'll read it in the morning. The disappointment that fell across their faces was instant and raw. Jess's mouth tightened into a hard line. Mark's shoulders sagged. That's fine, Mark said quietly. Of course, Leo, Jess managed through clenched teeth. Take your time. They stood and walked away, but not before Jess hissed under her breath. He was right there. Why didn't he sign? And Mark whispering back. He's old. He's scared. He'll do it in a few days. They disappeared into the hallway, unaware of what they'd just handed me. A recorded confession. A voluntary statement of intent. The final puzzle piece. I reached for my phone and stopped the recording. They thought they had secured the outcome they wanted. But they had secured mine. After that night, the night they tried to trap me with their carefully curated stack of legal poison, the house became a stage with 3 actors pretending not to know the ending of the play. In the mornings, when Jess brewed her coffee and Mark scrolled on his phone at the kitchen island, they spoke with forced pleasantries, fake smiles, overly cheerful tones. The politeness of people who were terrified their scheme was slipping away. Dad, did you sleep well? Oh, Leo, breakfast is ready. Their voices were brittle. Their eyes were sharp. They thought they were waiting for me to crumble. But I wasn't the one crumbling. Every morning when their car pulled away and silence settled over the house, the real work began. The living room turned into my war room. I had already collected the evidence, the forged Helix signature, the transaction list that revealed every stolen dollar, the audio recording where they incriminated themselves without hesitation. Now it was time to transform those facts into a weapon. I sat at the dining table with my old laptop, building a presentation meticulously, slide by slide, with the anger of a betrayed father and the precision of a forensic accountant who had spent his life exposing fraud. The first slide was simple, 2 signatures side by side, my real one and the fake one. The second slide, a clean ledger of every expense they made with my equity. Designer bags, vacations, a BMW, luxury spas, thousands upon thousands burned through with no shame. Then, a slide with the audio waveform of their own voices discussing exactly how they'd use my house and where they'd put me afterward. Their confidence, their arrogance, their assumption that I was already as good as gone. I put it all together. An entire year of deceit displayed like a courtroom exhibit. By the time I finished, the presentation felt heavy, the kind of heavy truth that crushes lies instantly. I saved the file with one name, Final Audit. The next step required more than just evidence. It required timing, movement, insurance, and that was where David came in. He stopped by again 2 days after the attempted POA ambush. As soon as Jess and Mark left for work, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find David standing there with a binder tucked under his arm. "Morning, Leo," he said, keeping his voice low. "I assume you bring news," I replied, letting him in. He set the binder on the dining table. "Everything is in motion. The buyer wired the earnest money. The contract is binding. Closing date is confirmed. The funds will go straight into your protected account." A protected account Jess and Mark had no access to and never would. "And the next part?" I asked. David opened the binder. Inside were printed copies of every document we'd collected, notarized, time-stamped, organized with the precision of a legal scalpel. "This," he said, tapping the organized sections, "is the complete package for the district attorney. Once I submit it, they'll assign an investigator and everything moves quickly from there." I nodded. "Good, but not yet." David gave me a look he'd given me many times in his teenage years, the look people use when they know someone is about to insist on doing something their own way, even if it's messy. "You're still planning to confront them first?" "They stole from me in my home," I said. "They try to evict me from my own life. They deserve to see the truth where they tried to bury it." David sighed, but his eyes carried respect. "Then let's plan this properly." We sat for hours going over every detail, how I'd present the evidence, how the police would enter afterward, how the timing had to be perfect, how I needed to leave the house immediately once the confrontation was done, for my own safety. By the time he left, the plan was airtight. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to end this. Later that week, when I started gathering my belongings, the essentials, the house felt both familiar and foreign. Like walking through an old photograph you already knew you were about to leave behind. I packed one suitcase. Exactly one. Clothes. A few books. My father's watch. Clara's recipe box. The photograph of us on moving day. Everything else I left where it was. Let Mark and Jess enjoy the empty bones of the place they were so hungry for. They'd never taste the memories baked into the walls. In the evenings, they hovered around me more closely than before. Jess suddenly cared about what I was reading. Mark asked if I needed help with managing my bank app, an app they thought would soon belong to them. Their anxiety seeped through every forced smile. They still believed they were shepherding me toward the inevitable. They didn't know the inevitable was for them. Every night when I went to bed, I felt the clock ticking louder. Not for me, for them. One evening, as they sat on the couch scrolling through real estate listings on Jess's tablet, talking in low tones and dreaming of paint colors and floor plans for their imaginary future, I stood silently in the hallway watching them. They looked so sure of themselves, so certain, so entitled. And in that moment, I felt something surprising. Not anger, not bitterness, not even grief, just clarity. They had never cared about the home, not the memories, not the history, not Clara. They cared about what they wanted, the fantasy life they believed they deserved without earning it. They thought they were owed my home. They thought they were owed my future. But they were about to discover that the man they underestimated was not the man they were dealing with. I turned away and walked to my study. The presentation was ready. The evidence was ready. The house was sold. The police were waiting for my call. All that remained was to choose the perfect moment. The moment everything would collapse around them, not with chaos, but with precision. A full year had passed since the night I overheard them planning to erase me from my own life. A full year of watching them circle me like vultures, waiting for me to finally weaken. A full year of smiling through their false concern and pretending not to notice how eager they were for my signature. But on the morning of the following Christmas, exactly 1 year to the day, the balance of power shifted. They believed this Christmas would finally give them what they wanted. They had no idea it would deliver everything they feared. The three of us sat in the living room after a breakfast of pastries Jess picked up from a trendy bakery. The decorations were cold and sleek, nothing like the warm, mismatched ornaments Clara and I used to hang each December. A small pile of gifts rested between us. They handed me another sweater, beige this time, empty of thought or meaning. I thanked them politely, folding it neatly across my lap. Mark cleared his throat, nervous energy swirling around him like a fog. Jess sat upright with perfect posture, the kind of posture someone uses when they're trying desperately to hide tension. She placed her coffee mug down beside her, aligning it perfectly with the coaster. A tiny ritual she did when she needed control. Then she inhaled deeply, turned to me, and delivered their final blow. "Leo," she began, her voice thick with syrupy affection. "We have some exciting news." Exciting news. I almost smiled. Mark shifted beside her, nodding as though he was forcing himself to believe in the lie he was rehearsing. Jess clasped her hands together, her face bright with fake optimism. "We found the most wonderful senior living community for you," she said softly. "It's north of the city. It's beautiful, warm, lively, full of people your age. They have every amenity you'll ever need." Mark jumped in, barely meeting my eyes. "We went on a tour. It's really nice, Dad. You'll love it." There it was, their finish line. I could see their chests rising with relief. They thought they had finally maneuvered me into a corner, that I would nod weakly and accept my fate. But all I felt was calm, an almost ancient calm, the kind that comes right before a storm breaks. I set the sweater aside, folded my hands in my lap, and looked at them with a soft smile. "That sounds very thoughtful," I said. Jess blinked, confused. This wasn't the fearful or defeated response she had anticipated. "But," I continued, "before I make any big decisions, there's something I'd like to share. A holiday tradition I'd like to start." Jess's eyebrows knit together. A tradition? Yes, I said, standing slowly. A look back at the past year. Mark swallowed hard. After all, the past year was something they desperately wanted to bury. I reached for the television remote on the table beside me. Jess rolled her eyes the way someone does when an elderly relative begins telling a story that's gone on too long. A home movie? She asked, annoyed. Yes, I said. Something like that. Mark, relieved to avoid confrontation, nodded. Sure, Dad. Let's see it. I pointed the remote at the TV. Good, I said quietly. It's important to remember the truth. I pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, and their world began to fall apart. There were no childhood videos, no family moments, no sentimental music. Instead, what appeared on screen was a stark, clinical slide. White background, black font. On the left, a scan of my real signature taken from my passport. On the right, the forged signature from the Helic document. A red digital circle marked the differences. Then, in bold red letters, forgery detected. The room didn't just go silent. It collapsed into stillness. Jess stared at the screen, her face draining of color. Mark's jaw fell slack. Before they could speak, the slide changed. A spreadsheet appeared, clean, cold, irrefutable. At the top, Helic disbursement record. Account ending in 4758. Their crimes were displayed line by line. $45,000, BMW dealership. $12,000, Aspen Ski Resort. $5,000, luxury watch. $2,400, Neiman Marcus. $1,750, spa treatments. Endless charges. Endless greed. Each expense was a nail in the coffin they had built for themselves. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The numbers did the talking. Jess pressed a trembling hand against her chest, whispering, No, what is this? How dare you? But the worst was yet to come. The final slide appeared. The screen went black for a long moment. Then a simple audio waveform pulsed across the center. Above it, recorded in this room, January 4th. And then their voices filled the room. Jess's voice came first, sickeningly sweet and damning. Exactly, Leo. Once you sign, we can manage everything, the house, the accounts. Protects you. Mark's voice followed, weary and compliant. It just makes sure we can take care of everything for you, Dad. The same words they'd whispered when they thought I was too old to remember or resist. Jess let out a strangled gasp. You recorded that? Mark put his hands over his face, shoulders shaking. I stood calmly, remote in hand. Yes, I said softly. I did. The audio fell silent, leaving only the sound of their ragged breathing. I pointed the remote, clicked once, and the screen went black. The presentation was over. But the consequences were just beginning. The silence that followed the presentation didn't feel like quiet. It felt like gravity. Heavy. Crushing. The kind of silence that settles in after the truth has scorched everything in its path. Jess stared at the television as if it had personally betrayed her. Her mouth opened and closed without forming a single coherent word. She looked like she was drowning in a sea she'd helped create. Mark had slumped into the sofa, hands covering his face. His shoulders shook with small, broken sobs, the kind that made you wonder if he was crying because of guilt or because he'd been caught. I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply stood in the center of the room, the remote dangling casually in my hand, and watched the house settle around the weight of what they'd done. Jess finally managed to speak. Her voice cracked like a snapped branch. What is this? A record, I replied calmly. A record of your choices. This is twisted, she spat. You manipulated those recordings. You doctored those files. I tilted my head slightly, like a teacher regarding a child stubbornly denying they'd been caught with a hand in the cookie jar. I didn't manipulate anything. You said those words. You forged those signatures. You spent that money. Jess looked at Mark for support, but Mark couldn't even look up. He was already broken. Her voice turned shrill. You can't do this to us, Leo. This isn't fair. I stepped a little closer. I didn't do anything to you, I said quietly. These are your actions. Your decisions. Your fraud. She backed away as I approached, her manicured nails trembling. You tricked us, she whispered. No, Jess, I said calmly. You underestimated me. The moment those words left my mouth, an unexpected sound sliced through the suffocating tension. Ding-dong. The doorbell. Jess jumped like she'd been struck. Mark's sobbing stopped abruptly. Both of their eyes snapped toward the front door with wide, terrified confusion. The timing was perfect, because it wasn't a coincidence. I turned away from them and walked toward the entryway. My steps slow, measured, purposeful. Behind me, Jess gasped, Leo? Who is that? Who did you call? I didn't answer. I opened the door. Bright winter light spilled across the floor, outlining the silhouettes of 3 figures. 2 wore the deep navy blue uniforms of the Austin Police Department. Their badges glinted in the morning sun. The third was familiar. David Chun, standing tall and composed, a leather folder under his arm. His expression was entirely devoid of friendliness. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, the officers close behind. Jess whimpered. Mark made a wounded animal sound, half sob, half plea. David's voice was calm, cold, formal. Good morning, Leo. Good morning, I replied, stepping aside. David turned his attention to the 2 criminals sitting on my sofa. Mark Petrov? Jessica Petrov. Neither could speak. Their eyes were saucers of disbelief and dread. My name is David Chun, he continued. And these are Officers Miller and Davies from the Austin Police Department. Jess staggered backward. No. Leo, please. David continued without hesitation. There are pending allegations regarding bank fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation of an elderly individual. These officers have questions for both of you. Jess screamed. Not a word. A raw, jagged scream that came from the deepest pockets of her fear. She looked feral, desperate, cornered. This isn't happening, she shrieked. This is our house. The irony made my chest tighten. Not with amusement, but with finality. Mark collapsed further into the sofa, hands trembling violently, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, Dad, he choked out. I'm so sorry, but it was too late. Sorry isn't a currency that pays back $150,000 in stolen equity. Sorry doesn't erase forged signatures. Sorry doesn't heal betrayal. Sorry was nothing. The officers stepped forward, calm and procedural. Jess backed away from them like a cornered animal. Mark didn't move at all, he just sat there, broken beyond repair. I didn't watch the rest. Justice, once set in motion, doesn't need an audience. I turned away from the chaos and walked down the hallway to my bedroom. On the neatly made bed sat a single suitcase, the same one I'd packed days ago. Clothes, documents, Clara's photo, the life I chose to carry forward. I picked up the suitcase, opened the bedroom door, and stepped back into the hallway. As I walked toward the front of the house, David glanced at me and gave a small, respectful nod. That was all that needed to be said. I stepped outside. The air was cold and clear, the sky a soft winter blue. A neighbor across the street was untangling Christmas lights with his dog at his feet. The world kept turning, indifferent to the disaster unfolding behind me. I walked slowly down the familiar stone path Clara and I had laid together so many years ago. The stones were slightly uneven, exactly as they had always been. At the edge of the lawn stood a bright red sign planted firmly into the earth. Sold. Felt final. Felt right. I didn't look back. I walked toward the street, toward freedom, toward dignity, toward a life that belonged entirely to me again. They had tried to remove me from my own home. Instead, I had walked out on my own terms. The cold air stung my cheeks as I stepped out onto the sidewalk, suitcase rolling quietly behind me. And for the first time in a long time, the world felt open. Why, possible. No whispers behind my back. No monitoring eyes. No carefully disguised venom sitting across my breakfast table. Only the sound of my own footsteps. Steady, purposeful. carrying me away from the ruins of what once passed for a family. Behind me, muffled through the door, came the chaos of confrontation. Raised voices. A crash. Jess screaming in furious protest. Mark choking out apologies he should have offered a year ago. But none of it belonged to me anymore. That chapter had ended the moment I chose myself. At the curb, David waited beside his car. He stepped forward and took the suitcase from my hand with professional ease. Not the way a son might, but in a way that showed he respected me. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded. The answer was simple. Yes. We didn't linger. He opened the passenger door, and I climbed in, the leather seat warmer than I expected. As we pulled away, I allowed myself one brief glance at the house through the rear window. It stood there, silent and unblinking, as though watching me leave after decades of offering shelter. But homes don't betray people. People betray homes. And that house deserved better memories than the ones Jess and Mark had tried to carve into it. David drove in silence for several minutes, letting the weight of everything settle. Only after we merged onto the main road did he finally speak. "The officers will take them in for questioning today. Probably separate interviews. The DA already has the files, so the process will move fast." I nodded, absorbing it. "Good. They committed several felonies, Leo," he continued. "Forgery, elder financial abuse, property fraud. The evidence is overwhelming. They won't be able to spin this." "They'll try," I murmured. "Jess will claw at any loophole she can find. Then she will only make it worse for herself." I stared out the window at the passing winter scenery. Bare trees, distant houses, a world that felt both familiar and brand new. "They used me," I said softly. "My own son." "People can lose their way," David replied. "But losing your way doesn't justify breaking the law." I didn't answer. I just watched the road ahead and let the truth sit where it needed to. We arrived at a modest extended-stay apartment complex on the west side of the city. Clean, quiet, practical. I wasn't looking for luxury, just stability until I decided where I truly wanted to go next. David helped carry the suitcase up to the unit. Once inside, the warm heat of the room wrapped around me. Neutral-colored walls, a simple bed, kitchenette, a desk by the window overlooking the parking lot. It wasn't home, but it was mine, and that was enough for now. David placed the suitcase near the bed. "You'll be comfortable here, and we can take as long as you need to decide your next steps." I nodded. "Thank you," I said. "Not just for this place, but for everything." He exhaled through his nose, emotion flickering across his features. "You don't need to thank me. You were there for me when I needed someone. I owed you more than this." "That was a long time ago," I said. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "Some debts don't expire." I smiled faintly. "Well, I'm glad you were the one person they didn't account for." David's expression hardened. "They should have. Underestimating someone older and wiser is foolish. Underestimating someone with an ally? That's how you lose." He stepped back toward the door. "I'll call you tomorrow. Rest tonight. You've been carrying this alone for too long." I nodded. "Drive safe, son." He paused, just briefly, when I used the word son, but he didn't comment. He only gave a small, respectful nod and left. When the door clicked shut, the room fell quiet. Not the suffocating, anxious quiet of the house I left behind, but a peaceful quiet. A quiet that felt like oxygen returning to my lungs after a year of being held underwater. I unpacked slowly. Clothes in the small closet. Clara's photo on the nightstand. Her recipe box beside it. My father's watch placed gently on the dresser. Each item familiar. Each one grounding me. Pieces of a life that had been threatened but not taken. The evening stretched on, soft and still. I made myself tea and sat at the desk, gazing out the window at the dimly lit parking lot. What happens after you win a war? People think victory feels triumphant, loud, explosive, glorious. But the truth is quieter, more reflective. You begin to realize how much of yourself you had to hold together just to make it through. How many nights you stayed awake planning, worrying, watching. How many memories you carried alone. And when the battle's over, you finally have space to feel. I didn't cry, but for the first time in months, I let myself breathe. Late that night, my phone buzzed. A text from an unsaved number. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. The message was short. We need to talk. Please. Mark. I set the phone down without responding. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Not now. Maybe not ever. I stood up, turned off the lights, and lay down in the unfamiliar bed, letting the darkness settle around me. The storm had passed. But the future? The future was wide open and waiting. The next morning arrived with a soft pale light leaking around the curtains. I woke early, old habits die hard, and sat at the edge of the bed for a long moment, listening to the quiet hum of the heater. It was strange waking up somewhere that wasn't my home, yet I didn't feel lost. I felt untethered, as though the weight I had carried for a year had suddenly fallen away, leaving behind a version of myself I hadn't felt in years. There were no whispered conversations behind thin walls, no tension curling under my skin, no reason to brace for an ambush, just calm. Calm I had earned. I made myself a simple breakfast, toast, eggs, and a cup of instant coffee. It wasn't much compared to Clara's cooking, but it was mine, made in a space free from manipulation and deceit. As I sat at the small table eating, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Mark. Dad, please. I need to explain. I didn't open it. Not yet. Some things required time. Time they hadn't given me when they were orchestrating my removal. Time I now took for myself. After breakfast, I opened the blinds and let the morning sun spill across the room. It warmed the corners, softening the unfamiliarity of the place. I stood there for several minutes, breathing in the stillness. That was when it happened. A knock on the door. 3 slow, steady taps. Not urgent, not hostile, but not expected either. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with alertness. After everything that had unfolded, unexpected knocks held new meaning. I walked to the door, cautious but composed, and opened it. Standing there was a woman in a gray coat, her dark hair pulled back neatly. She carried a small leather portfolio, and her expression was polite but unreadable. "Good morning," she said. "Are you Mr. Leonard Hargrove?" I straightened, gripping the edge of the door subtly. "Yes, that's me." She extended a hand. "My name is Elena Martinez. I'm with the district attorney's office." So it had begun. I stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. "Please, come in." She thanked me and stepped inside, taking a moment to look around the small apartment. Not judging, just observing like someone accustomed to entering all sorts of environments. She set her portfolio on the table and remained standing. "I won't take much of your time," she said, "but I wanted to speak with you directly before the formal proceedings begin." "Proceedings?" I repeated. "So the arrests were made?" She nodded calmly. "Mark and Jessica Petrov were taken in for questioning last evening. We have enough probable cause, and your evidence package was extremely thorough." "Good," I said quietly. She paused, studying me with a sympathetic but professional gaze. "I want to make sure you understand the next stages," she continued. "There will likely be formal charges filed within the next 48 hours. Forgery, fraud, exploitation of an elderly individual, potentially conspiracy." I remained silent, letting the words settle. "They won't be allowed near you," she added. "A protective order will be put in place automatically. You won't need to have contact with them during the legal process unless you wish to." I shook my head. "I don't." Elena nodded once, as though she expected that answer. Then she opened the portfolio and pulled out a document. "This is an official statement of acknowledgement," she explained. "It verifies that you are the victim in this case and outlines your rights. I'm required to provide it personally." I took the document, scanning the lines of text. Legal terms, rights, protections. A year ago, I would have felt overwhelmed reading something like this. Now, felt like confirmation. Proof that everything I'd endured wasn't just in my head. It was real, documented, validated. Elena closed her portfolio. There's one more thing. Her tone shifted slightly, less formal, more cautious. Mark asked to send you a message through us. I stiffened. She raised a hand gently. It's voluntary for you to hear it. You don't have to. For a moment I considered refusing, closing that chapter entirely, walking forward without turning back. But then, I nodded. Go ahead. She took out a folded piece of paper. He wrote this early this morning. Her voice remained neutral as she read. Dad, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I don't expect you to. I know what I did. I let Jess push me into things I should have stopped. I failed you. I failed myself. I didn't know how to say no to her. I didn't know how to be the son you deserved. She paused briefly, then continued. If you never speak to me again, I'll understand. But I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Not because we were caught, but because I see now what I became. When she finished, she folded the note carefully and slid it back into the folder. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just let the silence fill the spaces between us. Would you like to respond? Elena asked softly. I shook my head. Not yet. She seemed to understand. She gathered her things and prepared to leave. We'll keep you updated throughout the process. And if you need anything, protection, relocation assistance, counseling, you only need to reach out. Thank you, I said, for everything. She offered a small, respectful nod, then let herself out, closing the door behind her. The apartment fell quiet again. I stood there, one hand on the back of the chair, staring at nothing. Mark's message lingered in my mind. Not the part about regret. Regret is cheap. But the part where he admitted he didn't recognize the man he'd become. Neither did I. And perhaps that was the saddest part. I sat down slowly, exhaling a long, weary breath. Freedom tastes different when you've fought for it tooth and nail. But it leaves a question behind. What do you do with your life now that it belongs entirely to you again? I didn't know the answer yet, but I intended to find out. Night fell like a soft curtain over the apartment complex, turning the parking lot into a mosaic of shadows and pale street lamp halos. I sat on the small armchair near the window, a book open in my lap but unread, my mind circling the same questions again and again. What comes after justice? What comes after the storm? Even victories feel heavy when they cost you blood, trust, and the last ties to someone you once called family. I closed the book and set it aside, rubbing my temples. It had been a long day, the kind that pressed on you from the inside, the kind that demanded room to breathe. I brewed myself a cup of tea and moved slowly through the apartment. It wasn't home, not truly, but it was safe. It was stable. And for now, that was enough. Just as I reached the kitchen counter, my phone buzzed. Not a text, not a voicemail, a call. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. My stomach tightened for a moment, a conditioned reflex after everything I'd endured. But fear didn't sit in me long anymore. Not like it used to. Courage grows silently in the aftermath of betrayal. I answered. Hello. A shaky breath crackled through the speaker. Dad. Mark. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The space between his voice and mine felt like a lifetime. A distance made of choices, lies, hesitation, and love twisted into something unrecognizable. How did you get this number? I asked, keeping my voice steady. The public defender allowed me one call before they transferred us. I asked them to dial it. His voice quavered. Please don't hang up. I didn't. Not yet. What do you want, Mark? I asked quietly. He exhaled sharply, like someone who'd been underwater too long and finally reached the surface. I needed to say it myself, not through a letter, not through anyone else. A pause. Dad, I'm sorry. I closed my eyes, not because his words moved me, but because they hurt in a way apologies aren't supposed to. I know, I said after a long moment. No, he insisted, voice cracking. You don't. You can't. I let everything get out of control. I let Jess control me. I let her push me. I let the hunger for something easier turn me into someone I'm ashamed of. His voice shook harder. I should have protected you. I should have stopped it. I should have walked away from her. From the plan. From everything. He swallowed hard. I didn't. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to understand why. I leaned against the counter, exhaustion slipping into my bones. Mark. It wasn't just her. I know, he whispered. I know. Silence settled between us again, heavier this time. Dad? He said, barely audible. Do you hate me? I didn't answer immediately. I let the question sit. Let it breathe. Let it reveal itself. Hate, I repeated. No, I don't hate you. I could almost hear him collapse with relief. But, I continued, I don't trust you, and I don't know if I ever will again. That's the part you'll need to live with. The line went quiet. When he spoke again, his voice trembled. I understand. No, I said gently. You don't. Not yet. Trust isn't just a feeling. It's a bridge. And once it burns, rebuilding it takes time. Years. Honesty. Responsibility. And I need to see who you become before I decide whether that bridge is worth rebuilding. He sniffed sharply. I know I don't deserve it. Any of it. But thank you for picking up. You won't have this number again, I said. This was your one call. Make it count. Use it to decide what you want your life to look like when this is over. A long silence. Then, I love you, Dad. My chest tightened. Love shouldn't hurt the way his did. I hope, I said quietly, one day you learn what love really means. Before he could respond, a voice in the background called out, Time's up. Goodbye, Dad. He choked out. Goodbye, Mark. I ended the call. And I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because some wounds go too deep for tears. Some ache quietly, living in the part of your heart where forgiveness hesitates to take root. The apartment felt different now, quieter, somehow heavier. I sat back down in the armchair, letting the darkness of the room wrap around me like a blanket. There comes a moment after every war when the battlefield goes silent. When the noise dies, and all that's left is rubble, and the question of what comes next. I sipped my cooling tea and looked around at the small space. I didn't know where I'd go yet. Maybe the coast. Maybe somewhere closer to old friends. Maybe somewhere new entirely. But wherever I went, it would be my choice. My freedom. My life. No one would take that from me again. Not through family guilt. Not through manipulation. Not through forged signatures. Not through schemes born out of entitlement. I stood from the chair, walked to the window, and looked out at the stars shimmering faintly above the apartment complex. The world felt big again. Possible again. Mine again. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to think about the future. Not with fear, but with something unfamiliar and welcome. Hope. And as the night settled in fully, as the warmth of the room wrapped around me, I whispered to the empty space. I survived. Not as a victim, but as a man who refused to be erased.